Today's lesson is food poisoning, the invisible threat. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're talking about something called food poisoning. Okay, that's when you eat food and you get sick when you eat that food. You're not supposed to get sick when you eat food, but you'll probably get sick for various reasons. There might be bacteria growing in the food. It wasn't prepared properly. And the reason we're talking about this is because there was a case of food poisoning earlier this year when some people died as a result of food poisoning after they ate food at a restaurant.
Exactly right. We need to be very careful with this. Of course, a lot of us, if we're preparing food at home, we have a bit more control over how clean the food is and how safe we choose to be. But a lot of people are getting food from takeout places, maybe food from stalls in the night market, or even delivery food that might have been sitting in a container at the back of a motorcycle for a while. So it is something that we need to be aware of and need to be careful about because, yes, it is one of those unavoidable drawbacks of the convenience of so much takeaway food is that we don't prepare it ourselves at home.
It can happen sometimes, so let's find out what this is all about. Let's listen to the first part, and we'll be right back.
Food poisoning, the invisible threat. In March, 30 people became sick after eating at a restaurant in Taipei, with 4 later dying. The cause of their illness was a particularly dangerous type of food poisoning. Food poisoning occurs when someone consumes contaminated food or drink, and sadly, it's surprisingly common.
大家好，第一部分介绍形容词 contaminated， 它的意思是受污染的或是弄脏的。例如 The water supply became contaminated after the chemical spill. 化学物质泄漏后，水源受到污染。或者 Consuming contaminated food can lead to serious health issues. 食用受污染的食物可能导致严重的健康问题。另外补充这个字的名词 contamination, C-O-N-T-A-M-I-N-A-T-I-O-N, contamination 指的是污染或是弄脏。例如说 The area was declared unsafe due to high levels of contamination. 由于污染程度高，该地区被宣布为不安全。也可以说 Contamination of the river has affected the local wildlife. 河流的污染影响了当地的野生动物。
All right, so let's check out the first part of our article. This is a story that happened a few months ago, and I'm sure most people out there listening will be already quite familiar. The article says, in March, 30 people became sick after eating at a restaurant in Taipei, with 4 later dying. Okay, so yes, we don't have to say the year because it was the same year, so just a few months ago, 30 people, a rather large number, became sick after eating at a restaurant, and 4, unfortunately, later died. They were sick, they went to the hospital, and unfortunately, possibly because they were elderly or had other medical issues, they ended up dying. The food poisoning ended up killing them. The cause of their illness was a particularly dangerous type of food poisoning. So there you go. And we get a good description of what that is. Food poisoning occurs when someone consumes contaminated food or drink, and sadly, it's surprisingly common. Yes, it is surprisingly common. You yourself out there might have had a bout or your own experience with some food poisoning. But of course, this happens when we consume food or drink. It can also happen with things you drink as well. That's also something to bear in mind. But when you eat something, you consume it. Consuming is using up something in order to gain a benefit from it, probably. So our bodies consume food. Your car might consume oil or electricity to provide power to make it move. And of course, we consume a lot of things. In fact, people in an economy can be called consumers. We're buying up products, we're using those products and then buying more. In the same way that our body eats food, we use that food internally and then we get hungry and eat more food. Now that's all fine and healthy. You need to consume food and drink, but you don't need contaminated food and drink.
You do not, and if something's contaminated, it has been polluted. It is no longer pure. Some bad things have gotten into it, like bacteria or viruses or whatever. So the food has become contaminated, and if you eat that contaminated food, if you consume it, you might indeed get sick. And in the case of 4 people earlier this year, they actually ended up passing away. But sadly, of course, food poisoning is surprisingly common. Okay, you don't really hear about it too often, but actually it does happen, and we do need to be careful about that. Okay, let's move on now to the second part of our lesson. We'll listen to it first.
Food can become contaminated at any stage of its production, processing, storage, or preparation. Harmful substances are often present in the foods people buy, especially in raw vegetables, meat, and seafood. This means that people can easily contract food poisoning if steps aren't taken to prevent it.
第二部分看到名词 storage 表示储藏或是储存。例如 I need to find more storage space for all these books. 我需要为这些书找到更多的储存空间。或是 At the start of spring, Stephanie puts all of her winter coats in storage. 当春天开始时 Stephanie 把她所有的冬衣都存放起来。
All right, so let's check out the second paragraph. Food, it says, can become contaminated at any stage of its production, processing, storage, or preparation. So there you go. It's not just in the kitchen. It's not just not washing your hands after touching the chicken or not washing your vegetables well enough. It can actually happen, this contamination, bringing impurities that can make you sick into your food. It can happen at many stages of the food coming from the farm to eventually arriving cooked at your table. So this would be in the production. That's the growing and the making of the food, whether on a farm or we're talking about, with animals or something like that. Processing, cutting the fruits and vegetables, bringing them to a factory, slaughtering the animals and cutting them up into meat and things like that. Storage, keeping the food. So if the refrigerators, for example, aren't cold enough or things aren't frozen well enough, contamination can happen. Or preparation, that's the final end stage. That's in the kitchen, actually preparing, making the food. Storage, as I briefly mentioned there, is just holding something. When you think of a warehouse, that's used for storage of large amounts of things by big companies or factories. And also in your home, you have cupboards and closets and drawers and things like that. Anywhere you put things can be storage. You're putting them there to be convenient, to be safe, to use them later. Or you could even think of the bag that you take with you when you leave your home as the storage for the things you use. But generally, storage is in a fixed place, like a warehouse, a closet, or even a box that you might keep things in.
Right, so of course this is all the food production process, again, from growing the food on a farm to processing it and bringing it in to a warehouse or something and storing it there. And finally, we've got the preparation where somebody actually cooks the food. And then, of course, at the very end, people consume the food. And harmful substances are often present in the foods people buy, especially in raw vegetables, meat, and seafood. So again, we're talking about harmful substances or things in your food that can cause harm, that can hurt you, and they're often present in the foods that you buy, especially if you buy raw vegetables. You got to be careful with those, and sometimes, of course, people don't like to eat raw vegetables in salad because they might have some sort of contaminants in the salad, and sometimes this can happen with meat as well, pork or beef or whatever, and chicken, and of course, seafood, which of course is food from the sea, fish, octopuses, and things like that. All of those could have harmful substances in them.
Absolutely, they can. Seafood, of course, and meat are especially prone to having contamination or giving you food poisoning. But yes, raw vegetables, that's why it's so important to wash your vegetables before you do anything with them. And this means that people can easily contract food poisoning if steps aren't taken to prevent it. So yes, it definitely makes it easy, especially if you're preparing a lot of your own food, growing your own food. But even the food you buy from a supermarket that looks clean clean and safe, you do need to take some basic steps because it is easy to contract food poisoning. Contract here, we're kind of using it like to get something, to be infected by something. If you go out without a mask and without washing your hands, you might contract a cold. If a lot of people are around you are sick, you might catch or get that cold in the same way that you get food poisoning. And you get it if steps aren't taken to prevent it. Proper safe steps, things like keeping your food cold in the fridge, washing your hands, not letting certain types of food come in contact with others, especially raw foods. And we're going to get into some of the more common types of food poisoning that we all want to try to avoid in the next part of the article, so let's give that a good listen. Bacteria, particularly Salmonella, Listeria, and Escherichia coli, are the most common cause of food poisoning. Viruses also frequently result in food poisoning, with norovirus being the main culprit. This virus can also spread easily from person to person, which is why it often affects school children. Less common but often more dangerous causes are parasites like Giardia and certain chemicals used in agriculture or found in seafoods that absorb toxins from algae. The recent food poisoning case in Taipei was found to have been caused by the toxin bongkrecic acid, the first time this cause was reported in Taiwan.
第三部分看到名词 virus， 它的意思是病毒。例如 Betty has been sick with a stomach virus the past few days. Betty 过去几天因肠胃炎感染而不舒服。也可以说 There's a horrible virus going around at the moment. 目前有一种可怕的病毒正在流传。这边来补充一个相关单字 bacteria. B-A-C-T-E-R-I-A bacteria. 它是名词，表示细菌。例如Your hands might look clean, but they're probably covered in bacteria. 你的手也许看似干净，但很可能布满细菌。也可以说 Every night, Gail uses cleaner to kill bacteria in the kitchen sink. 每天晚上 Gail 都用清洁剂杀死厨房水槽的细菌。接着看到名词 culprit， 它的意思是罪魁祸首或是肇事者。例如 The police finally caught the culprit behind the series of thefts. 警方终于抓到了一系列盗窃案的罪魁祸首。又或者说 Investigators are still searching for the culprit responsible for the data breach. 调查人员仍在寻找导致数据泄露的肇事者。继续介绍名词 parasite， 指的是寄生虫或是寄生物。举例来说 The documentary showed how parasites can manipulate the behavior of their hosts. 该纪录片展示了寄生虫如何操控宿主的行为。又或者说Some plants act as natural remedies against intestinal parasites. 一些植物可以作为对抗肠道寄生虫的天然疗法。最后补充这个字的形容词 parasitic. P-A-R-A-S-I-T-I-C, parasitic, 指的是寄生的。例如 Parasitic worms can cause various health problems if they infect humans. 如果寄生虫感染人类，可能会引起各种健康问题。也可以说The study examines the effects of parasitic infections on wildlife populations. 这项研究检视了寄生感染对野生动物群体的影响。
Okay, let's continue with our lesson. Again, we're talking about contaminants that can get into your food, and we're going to focus specifically in the third part of our lesson on bacteria. Now, bacteria, particularly Salmonella, Listeria, and Escherichia coli, are the most common cause of food poisoning. So just in case you wanted to know, these are some forms of bacteria that can get into your food. If you're a scientist or a chemist or whatever, you might be interested in knowing these terms. And again, these are the most common causes of food poisoning. There probably are others.
I'm definitely sure that there are others, but yes, these are the ones that are common. These are the ones you might also read news stories about, because when there are outbreaks of food poisoning, as there can be in hotels or, on airplanes and other places like that, cruise ships as well, these are some of the common ones we hear about. Viruses also frequently result in food poisoning, with norovirus being the main culprit. So it's not just some nasty bacteria that might come in the form of this salmonella and the other ones we mentioned. Both viruses and bacteria can make us sick. Of course, we all know about the COVID virus, and then we also know that washing your hands and keeping things clean will protect you from bacteria, but both of them are things we want to avoid getting in our bodies, and surprisingly, at least for me, viruses can result in food poisoning. I would have always put that down to different types of bacteria, but no, viruses can do it too, with norovirus being the main culprit, and it also points out how to get it. We're going to get to that in a second, but a culprit is basically someone who has committed a crime or is suspected of committing a crime. If the police are looking for the person who is responsible for a crime, they would say they are seeking a culprit, a certain person of a certain height or size or description or something like that. And we can also use it for non-human things that cause problems. You know, someone who's examining your car that's broken might say, this broken fan belt, that's the culprit. That's why your car is running hot or won't start. So it's basically the responsible party for something, and it doesn't always have to be a person. So norovirus is one to watch out for. It says this virus can also spread easily from person to person, which is why it often affects school children. Yes, I seem to remember several times, and maybe during the winter months, the colder months, you might read of norovirus outbreaks in kindergartens or preschools or places like that. And of course, they have to shut them down and clean them and have the kids all stay home and protect themselves, because both viruses and bacteria, if they enter your body through food or through other ways, will make people sick.
Exactly. So the kids are close together and viruses can easily spread that way.
Yes.
So again, that's the reason, that's the explanation for why children tend to suffer from this problem more than other people do. And here in the final paragraph it says, less common but often more dangerous causes are parasites, like Giardia, and certain chemicals used in agriculture or found in seafoods that absorb toxins from algae. Okay, that's a pretty long sentence here, so let's break it down here. We've got less common causes, but they're often more dangerous, and they include parasites. Okay, a parasite, of course, is a living thing that lives on another living thing, and it gets its nutrients and other things from that living thing. And we've got parasites all over our bodies at all times, and there are parasitic plants out there as well that live on trees or whatever. And this example here we've got is Giardia. That's a parasite. And also we've got some chemicals in agriculture, and these things can be found in seafoods that absorb toxins from algae. So watch out for those parasites that can also cause food poisoning. And then they can absorb toxins from algae. If you absorb something, you kind of suck it in, you take it into your body like a towel can absorb water.
Very, very interesting. And absorbing water from a towel, that's fine. Absorbing information, taking that information into your brain to learn things, that's great. But absorbing toxins is something you probably want to avoid, because a toxin is a poison. It's something that is harmful to living things, to humans or animals or things like that. So when we think of poisons, when we think of things that will make us sick, different types of chemicals that are going to hurt us in some kind of way, whether it's the poison that we might get, the venom we might get from a snake bite, or poison we might get from chemicals around the home, things like that. Toxins in our water, in our air, in our food can enter our bodies and make us sick, give us diseases, or even kill us. And some could come from algae. Algae are basically very, very simple plants. So when we think of seaweed, algae, when we think of green, simple plants that might be growing on rocks under the water, that's also algae. If you ever have had a fish tank at home, you might notice the brown or green stuff that starts to grow on the inside of the glass. That is algae too. And of course, algae can grow on food, especially wet things can start to develop molds and other types of simple living organisms, simple plants like algae, and those can all make us sick. So now we can return our attention to the recent food poisoning outbreak that happened in Taipei and certainly captured the headlines.
Exactly. So again, we've talked about all of the possible causes of food poisoning. So as Mike said, we're going to focus now specifically on the event or the incident that occurred in Taipei about 5 months ago. The recent food poisoning case in Taipei was found to have been caused by the toxin bongkrecic acid. I hope I said that right.
Yeah.
And this is the first time this cause was reported in Taiwan. Okay, so we've got a toxin here, which is a kind of acid. I guess it's neither bacteria or viruses. Bongkrecic acid, that was the culprit. That's what caused the trouble a couple of months ago in good old Taipei.
Absolutely. I remember reading these stories. It was quite shocking. The number of people who were sick, the fact that a few of them had died and some others were still in the hospital, very, very ill. And I remember reading about this bongkrecic acid and never having heard of it before. It was completely new to me, this toxin that had caused the food poisoning incident. And I believe it was a vegetarian restaurant of some kind, and they were still trying to track down how exactly the food got there. I think one of the chefs might have ended up being infected as well. So a bit of a medical mystery there that I'm sure investigators are well on top of now and learning more about. But yes, it was the first time this cause was reported in Taiwan. So of course there have been other food poisoning cases in Taiwan, but usually with more traditional things like we mentioned earlier, salmonella, listeria, and whatnot. So first appearance of bongkrecic acid as a culprit in a food poisoning case, and unfortunately rather serious and fatal food poisoning case. So more stuff there to pay attention to and to be aware of in order to keep yourself and the people around you, especially if you're preparing food, keep everyone safe.
Absolutely. And remember, an acid is a chemical substance that will neutralize alkalis. So an acid is kind of the opposite of an alkali, and it will turn the litmus paper red. Just for your reference, I'm sure you studied these things in your science class. You know what an acid is and what a base is. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分的最后有提到，食物中毒发生在某人食用受污染的食物或饮料时。那么遗憾的是，这个情况出乎意料的常见。文中它是用 consume 来表达食用。那我们来学它的字首字根。好，看到 sume 或是 sumpt 这一类字根，它有拿、消耗或是花费的意思。那在 consume 这个字当中，它的字首 con 是做强调用， sume 这部分表示花费取用，合在一起 consume 它具有消耗、花费或者是吃喝饮用食用的那种语义咯。我们顺便补充两个这一类字根的单字。第一个是 sumptuous， sumptuous， 那它的字根 sumpt 表示花费，ous 是形容词字尾，合在一起 sumptuous 它就是用来形容昂贵的、奢侈的、豪华的。第二个补充的是 resume， 它的字首 re 表示再次，字根 sume 表示取用，合在一起 resume 它具有继续进行、重新开始的意思。好，那课文第三部分它有提到诺罗病毒，那就写到说This virus can also spread easily from person to person, which is why it often affects school children. 这种病毒也很容易在人与人之间传播，这就是它经常影响学童的原因。那句子里面的 which 是用来代指前方子句，也就是这种病毒也很容易在人与人之间传播的这件事情。那 which is why 用来表达这件事是什么什么的原因。好，那当我们使用 which 引导关系子句来对前方子句做补充说明时，因为这个修饰的对象是很明确的，我们不用限定范围，所以呢，这是属于非限定用法。which 的前面必须加逗号。那我们造个例句 Tina is lactose intolerant, which is why she doesn't drink milk. Tina 有乳糖不耐症，这就是她不喝牛奶的原因。好，那再造一个例句是 Eric became addicted to online games, which made his parents worried. Eric 对线上游戏成瘾，这使得他爸妈很担心。那句子里面的 which 就是用来代指前面的子句，也就是 Eric 对线上游戏成瘾的这件事。然后他说到 which made his parents worried 是用来补充说明前面这件事情呢，让他爸妈很担心。 那因为是非限定用法，所以这个关系子句有用逗号跟主要子句隔开。那其实在这个例句当中，我们还可以省略掉关系代名词 which， 然后把主动动词 made 改成现在分词 making， 那么句子就会简化成Eric became addicted to online games, making his parents worried. 好，那么以上今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Consume. Some horses consume about 15 to 20 pounds of hay per day. Contaminated. Amanda got sick on her camping trip when she drank some contaminated water. Storage. After harvesting the corn, the farmer put it in storage to save it for later use. Virus. Despite efforts to stop its spread, the virus has caused many people to become ill. Absorb. The dish towel quickly absorbed the spilled coffee from the table. Acid. Lemon juice contains an acid that gives it a sour flavor. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.